The problems facing New Zealand's primary sector have been mounting at a rapid pace. So I think it's time for open hearts and open minds. Welcome to Serious Country, and tonight and for the next week or maybe two, welcome to my home. The comforts of home on this very wintry day are a pleasure to broadcast from whilst we are in a bit of limbo to move into our brand new home in Taitapu. I'm your host, Sarah Perium, and from my home to yours tonight, live wherever you're watching, with your feet up after a hard day on the big telly, or watching on your iPad, headphones in, while the family might be running around. If you're cooking dinner, or if you're out still hard working and driving around listening to us via the live radio feed, did you know that you can get this at seriouscountry.com? Now, that false sense of security, known as a warm August, has today across parts of New Zealand and the south many pull back the curtains. You know, there's a sea of that white stuff, snow. Now, my thoughts certainly go out to those that have an early lambing in Southland. It's a dreadful situation picking up dead lambs. And of course, our thoughts also to how you prevent pugging around gateways after snow thaws, Mr. Parker. Also, our thoughts tonight are with the firefighters in the Mackenzie Basin today and through the night battling the blaze. And what I'm understood is that it could take months to put out, and houses near Twizel looking to evacuate. In a sobering time, do we mention how grazing livestock could prevent the spread of wilding pines, Miss Sage? Now, the disconnect of our government's policies reality is so real. And what happens when the intention is pushed to the nth degree? We see a swing in one direction versus a holistic balance with consulted opportunities for all parties to have their values met. Now, tonight on the show, we're going to talk about neglected areas of our industry that, left for too long in one direction, has brought havoc on the price of the product to the passionate producer. This is both in wool and honey, but promises to do more come with a heavy heart. It's one thing to be open-hearted and open-minded to new concepts and ideas that come daily in the primary sector. But if we don't invest in our own future, are we going to wait for the government to do everything for us and own everything? Now, I can tell you from a personal point of view. After reading an article today in my industry, I work in two industries, media and, of course, farming. This was a New Zealand On Air survey that said that YouTube, Facebook and Netflix have now trumped TVNZ and MediaWorks as audience now in New Zealand are turning there to watch content. I chose to invest in my future and left the major networks to protect and harness the value of my own future. Now, let's think about the early zespri growers who took very big risks, as well as the dairy conversions back in the day and merino growers, manuka honey suppliers. You get the point. Now, the commodity players are working hard to leverage their product story from standard to superior, and good on them. It's about time. Right, I turn to you tonight, my wonderful, beautiful live audience, to head to the comments. I'd love you to fill it up. Let's do this. Oh, goodness, I said it, Joel. Live running weather commentary around rural New Zealand. Let's do it, okay, to rival the most experienced meteorologists. All I want you to do, wherever you're watching live, tell me in the comments below. How much rain did you get? And if it was snowing, I got some serious Snapchats from down south. This is across the Mackenzie Basin through central Otago. How much snow did you get today? And whereabouts are you? Throughout the show tonight, I can read those out. And let's do a bit of a running live weather report. And Joel/Megan, if we get any photos come through in the comments, let's put them up as well. Of course, I'll read them out. That would be fantastic. You know, because winter has shown hers. Joel.
Yep.
You know how we talk about Mother Nature, but say, for instance, you have different seasons: spring, summer, winter. What would winter be gender-wise? I didn't prep you on that question.
No, I have no idea. Cold?
That's something
cold and distant. I don't know.
I will say no more. On the topic of gender, can I just give a wee shout out? A fantastic read in Farmers Weekly, very valued Farmers Weekly contributor. Before I get into our great guests, turn to page 22. Mr. Stephen Wynne Harris's piece got us both cracking up over lunch. It's called Strong Women Are at the Helm. Maybe if Joel lets me lay at the end of the show, I might read out some excerpts out of that towards the end of the show. It is so good. So on that note, the fabulous lineup on Sarah's Country tonight. We're going to get a wrap after 7:20. There's been a lot of primary sector company results of late, so I've asked Forsyth, Barr, Equity and Analyst Guy Hooper to join us and give us a bit of a wrap around the headwinds, or is it a bit of a tailwind for a lot of our primary sector companies? How have they been faring in their annual results, and what's his take on the next 12 months? Now, spring is officially here and it's time to be aware. We discuss after 7:30 the marketing strategy for New Zealand honey. This is the non-Manuka honey across the country with Apiculture New Zealand Chief Executive Karin Kos. Then to close the show, a group of passionate representatives from across the primary sector have decided to run with the recommendations of the Wool Industry Project Action Group report from Minister O'Connor. And this has created a new group called the Strong Wool Action Group. It's going to be chaired by Rob Hewitt, who is not shy of joining the chair seat. And he's going to join us after 7:40 to discuss why the meat industry is getting involved in helping a hand to wool's woes. But first up on the show, to kick us off, and let's stay on that topic of wool, AgResearch's Director Dr. Trevor Stuthridge and Research Team Leader Dr. Stewart Coolie take us through their long history of research into wool, and they are saying they're still very optimistic about its long-term prospects. All that after the break on Sarah's Country. This is Sarah's Country.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
like electric fencing,
or horse feed,
or bee suits.
children,
Chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear. Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help your farm,
Grow, milk, drench,
rear, come on in.
because we're out here too.
Delicious doesn't start in a single moment or with a single ingredient. Delicious starts here.
I don't want to make too many apologies for talking a lot about wool on Sarah's Country, because it is no joke that we are in the lowest prices for strong wool that has ever been in this country, and it's getting to crunch time. So, of course, the pulpit section in Farmers Weekly is always a fantastic read. And, of course, if you've got an opinion on anything, make sure you send it into the Farmers Weekly editor, Brian. The opinion piece this week in the op-ed was written by AgResearch's Dr. Trevor Stuthridge, and research team leader Dr. Stewart Coolie is also going to join us shortly. But the trials and the tribulations of the wool industry have been very well aired. But in particular around wool research, it's not touched on so much. So joining us now is both Dr. Trevor and Dr. Stewart. Good evening, gentlemen. We were discussing there in the break around the gender of winter and of seasons. You have some thoughts?
Well, traditionally it's known as Old Man Winter, so I think we can assume the gender is male.
Thank you. It's a very scientific approach.
Yes, very scientific answer.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Now, Trevor, what drove you to put pen to paper and form an opinion in public around what is going on behind closed doors with wool research and why strong wool growers shouldn't give up?
I think because we're conscious of the change in the sector and how they are struggling, but the struggle is coinciding with a real driver towards natural fibres and new opportunities for innovative biomaterials. So we wanted to make sure that the industry understood that there's still lots of upside in the sector around appropriate production of wool in the right way and then what we can use it for. And this comes at a time when I think the consumers around the world are looking for this sort of product. So not time to give up yet. In fact, it's perhaps a time to focus more deeply on how we can add more value to it and really make it a more fulfilling part of the sector overall.
Years. Can you just give us an overview of some of the exciting projects that you are working on that you can publicly talk about?
Look, so we cover the entire agricultural sector. In the wool area, I'll certainly pass on to Stewart, who's a world expert in the production of wool products. I guess on the farm, we've been doing a lot of work, as you know, with the sector around improving wool breeding, looking at other ways to handle the wool and improve resistance to things like fly strike and so forth. So we make the point in the article, there's still plenty of work to do on farm as well. But I'll ask Stewart to give you some background on his many years of work of doing something with wool, which I think is really exciting. And as I say, comes at a time of great opportunity.
Yeah, Stewart, let's lighten about what's happening within the shed and on farm.
Yes, well, I can't say too much about the on-farm aspect of research that's going on. My expertise is more in stuff that's happening in the post-farm gate space. And I guess the key focus that we have, well, there's probably two focuses to what we have at the moment, one of which is research that better understands and demonstrates the beneficial attributes of wool so that it can be marketed to those consumers that Trevor's talked about who are looking for natural products, high-performing natural products. And that's often focused on the well-being aspects of wool, but also the environmental and sustainability aspects. So we do research that relates to things like biodegradation behavior of wool compared to synthetics, and a lot of concern there is around microfiber or microplastic pollution that comes from synthetic materials. And then there's an important aspect of research that has a focus on making new materials or new types of products, high-value products out of wool. And some of that involves using the wool as its natural fibre form, but some of it also involves pulling it apart and reconstituting it in ways that create more value. So those are probably the main focus areas for the wool research that we've done over the last few years as a way of trying to address the concerns that exist for the wool industry and creating more demand for wool.
What I would say, Sarah, is that on farm there's still plenty of opportunity for breeding finer, more expensive wool, higher performing, and also some of the costs of wool handling. I think we can look at ways to reduce those. So we spend an awful lot of cost on the farm baling the wool and processing it on farm in the bale form. If we could bulk handle it and transport it in a bulk form, that would certainly reduce the cost of wool production on the farm as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I've had some conversations with a lot of bright minds around Lincoln here and questioning things like, why do we have a huge capital outlay for twice a year or sometimes once a year? And to have people come in and question what we've done for 100 years. I mean, what would that ideal look like in terms of changing to harvest of our wool and to other ways that have new products and things like that?
Well, I think if we have higher value in the final product in terms of using it for advanced insulation, advanced clothing systems as Stewart is doing, then some of those costs can be passed on down into the market. But I think efficiency on farm around cycles of shearing, cycles of basically the way we handle, as I said, in terms of cost of putting it together into bales and so forth. I think there's lots of opportunities around, sheep that don't have wool that we don't need. So breeding sheep that don't have wool in parts of the body that aren't worth shearing because of the quality or the contamination of the wool. There's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to be more sophisticated in the way we generate the wool.
I think one thing I was going to add to that is that I guess it's important to produce fibre that is optimized for the end uses that we require it for. So when we make new products that have high value, we're often putting a higher specification on the wool than is perhaps normally the case. So producing wool fibre of a type that is optimized for that purpose is a good way of thinking about how you might link the on-farm fibre production side of things with the post-farm gate fibre processing and product development.
So say, for instance, the product of keratin going into nutraceuticals and healthcare and cosmetics, how would something like that be handled in a very different way on farm, but also too from a feed management perspective, because that's got a lot to do with the fibre makeup?
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly how in that situation you would manipulate things, but I could imagine ways in which you would. You could potentially, you'd be changing from a situation where your focus would be on the structural and physical attributes of the fibre to more of a focus on the protein that makes up the fibre. So you would be wanting to get a large quantity of that material. You wouldn't necessarily be so concerned about the diameter or other attributes of it. You'd be interested in getting a good quality of keratin in high quantity in the most efficient way possible.
And that's because you're going to deconstruct it further down the system. So you don't need to be so worried about sorting it on farm, because there's a process downstream that's going to basically pull it apart into much smaller pieces than you would normally do. So that deconstruction, taking that complexity of a wool fibre and retaining that complexity is what we want to do. But also taking it from just saying it's this long, thin thing to how we can actually break it into smaller components and introduce it into cosmetics or into healthcare products is a real opportunity. And many of the ingredients in those products at the moment are not sustainable. They are made from synthetic polymers and so forth. And so the wool as a natural replacement for that has a big market appeal, but also just the qualities that wool introduces into those sort of products, the skincare properties that wool has. As a natural protein, the skin doesn't mind natural proteins. They're being next to it, and so it behaves in a different way, say, from putting various bioplastics or polymers into a system.
And in your pulpit piece in Farmers Weekly, Trevor, your science impact leader Andy Cooper has been a part of this wool industry project action group. We're going to be joined by Rob Hewitt, who's taking the chair role of the Strong Wool Action Group. Now, one of the big things, part of that, is funding and the structure around, or creating effectively a new structure pipeline around that. How do you believe that would be a most beneficial system?
Well, I think the reason we all need the funding is in many ways at the moment we have a challenge around that low value material, and we don't know what we don't know about what to do with it. So we need to explore the properties of the material, the efficiencies across the value chain, and then how we can align that to the new consumer drivers that are out there. From our perspective with that pulpit piece, it's too early to give up on wool. There is actually, if anything, the alignment of the international markets for these type of products is just beginning. There's just an acceptance that this is what the sophisticated consumer wants to have. But they will not pick up on that unless these products have been developed and de-risked and scaled up to a point where they can actually appreciate them and use them. So this sort of funding stream we think is really important to test the opportunities for wool beyond its traditional uses. and then scale it up to a point where we can start to impact the local sector in terms of changing the way we behave in terms of harvesting the wool and also how we process it downstream. And of course, in New Zealand, the greatest opportunity is ideally to recover as much of that value onshore as we can. So processing it to the point where it can go offshore to L'Oreal or Neutrogena and so forth is great, but we want to keep the value onshore as far as we can in terms of the processing of that material.
Stuart, what does that look like from what projects you've been working on?
Yeah, I think absolutely that's the case. The research that we do is there to demonstrate the attributes of wool in these applications. We find clever ways of doing that. We increase our understanding of the material, which helps us be able to deliver a product to those consumers. And I think a lot of what we like to do is that research that engages with the local industry, the New Zealand onshore processors, companies that exist. There's a number of them now that are doing very clever things with wool in New Zealand. They're looking to add value to the fibre in New Zealand. Those are the ones that are the most exciting from a research perspective.
And if we can create that value onshore, we can send some of it back to the wool producers themselves. So at the moment, they are very much in a commodity space and perhaps don't get the return that they require. So more add value onshore allows us to return it back down the value chain, back to the original farmers themselves, and support them in driving that innovation from their side as well.
And Trevor, just to close, research is only research unless it's commercialised. And I'm really looking forward to being joined by Brooke Marshall on tomorrow night's show from AgResearch, commercialisation manager who's a finalist in the KiwiNet Awards. But am I fair to say AgResearch is seriously leaning into commercialising science, and this is a big part of your future?
Absolutely. So science without uptake is interesting but not useful. So really we're focusing more on our new science strategy around the uptake and application of the science. And it's about making sure, therefore, we're closely aligned with the consumers and the producers right from the very beginning of our thinking, all the way through to the commercialising stage that Brooke's so good at managing on our behalf. So yeah, if we can't align to the needs of the end users, then we're really in the realm of doing interesting stuff for ourselves. So AgResearch's key role, I think, as a CRI for the agricultural sector is to make sure we align to consumer needs and to the farming sector, take them on that journey, de-risk it for them, and show them the future that they can have.
What a great way to end. Thank you so much, Research Director at AgResearch, Dr. Trevor Stuthridge, and Research Team Leader, Dr. Stewart Coolie. Thank you so much for your time and some fantastic things there. I think it just cements what I said there in the opening around there is opportunity there, and it's a de-risking it for the farmer is one thing, but investing in your future is another. And let's be supportive of these opportunities that are coming up. As I said, we will hear from Rob Hewitt towards the end of the show around what the Strong Wool Action Group means for your future as a sheep farmer here in New Zealand, as well as what is next and how. That's the big thing, not why, but how this will play out. Now, coming up after the break in Serious Country, we are going to be joined by Equity Analyst for Forsyth Barr, Guy Hooper, who's going to give us an overview on the annual results of our major primary sector companies that are listed on the stock exchange and how they're fared due to the impact of COVID, or have they done well despite COVID? All that up next on Serious Country. This is Serious Country.
The recipe for perfect beef and lamb. Take one small fresh country. Make sure it's nice and remote. Keep it at the ideal temperature all year round. Next, mix in the farmers. They go perfectly with the nature of this unique place. Add regular sprinkles of rain to really bring out the lush meadow grass. Then let your animals happily graze on this grass, all day, every day. And there you have it, New Zealand, the perfect recipe for beef and lamb. Taste pure nature.
Now, the rounds of annual results from our major food and beverage listed companies have been a mixed bag, much like the weather today around the country. You know, everything from snowboarding down south to surfing weather in the north, we have had a mixed bag of weather. Now, one phrase that certainly dominated the description of these annual accounts is the impact of COVID-19. It was just more about the wording of that differentiated the market positioning of these companies, whether it read due to the impact of or despite the impact of, can make so much of a difference to wrap around those numbers. Now, joining us to discuss and give an overview of our country's listed agricultural and food and beverage companies is equity analyst for Forsyth Barr, Guy Hooper, who joins us now. Good evening, Guy, and thank you for taking the time to join us. With so many numbers going on, I thought it'd be great to get a bit of a handle and overview around some of the trends and discrepancies between these companies. So let's start with the introduction on the disruption to the delivery of some of these results due to COVID, and of course the general change in corporate communications because of lockdown versus these traditional events and engaging shareholders within these results.
Yeah, good evening, Sarah, and thanks for having me on. No, it's definitely been an interesting time, and I guess it's much the same for a lot of us, just getting used to the Zoom culture that now exists. In terms of delivery of the results, I mean, companies were able to continue much effectively undisrupted from a corporate communications point of view, with annual results calls still taking place, and certainly high levels of engagement. And like you said, certainly a fair few questions just around the COVID impacts and whether those have been tailwinds or headwinds.
Absolutely. We'll get to a bit of a summary after we work through some of the results of these companies. Now, we do need to acknowledge you don't deal with dairy or kiwi fruit. So let's kick off, though, with fruit through the edible and drinkable kind. Delegates Group, New Zealand's largest listed winemakers, net profit increased despite COVID and despite these US wine sales taking a hit. How did they manage that?
Yeah, look, Delegates was a strong result, and really was volume driven, although that volume was largely into the UK, or that volume growth, was largely into the UK, as they saw an annualisation of a convenience customer they picked up in the prior period. US was also showed good signs of growth. I mean, Delegates probably benefiting from a few factors there. Number one being channel exposure. So a lot of wine companies who are overexposed to the food service channel would have had a much harder time. However, Delegates has a really good position within the convenience and within the retail channel, which with people no longer eating out and drinking at home, their sales were able to hold up. The other reasons, I suppose, helping them out was just the size of the brand, and you saw a lot of consumers flock to brands they know and trust. And then within New Zealand or within the US, imported wine, New Zealand seems to have bucked the trend, with most other countries going back much further. So New Zealand wine, and in particular Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, has performed relatively well.
This just says a bit more about the UK drinking culture under lockdown of cheap Sav as opposed to fine Pinot Noir in New York. Now, trading throughout the COVID-19 lockdown without its challenges for Scales Corporation, the home of Mr. Apples, last week reported a net profit after tax for the group of $27.8 million. Is this a sign the apple and pear industry is on track for that $1 billion mark?
Yeah, look, the apple and pear industry has been performing reasonably well as of late, and Mr. Apple in particular has been investing into new premium varietals or trademark varietals, in particular aimed at the Asian markets, which have been able to achieve some reasonable prices, and as these new plantings mature, should improve in terms of yield and lifting volumes. From a COVID perspective, Mr. Apple had a relatively soft period, although that was largely down to, a large domestic crop in China, and then the timing of the Chinese lockdown meant that their sales window was effectively shortened, and there was a higher supply of domestic apples in the China market, which weighed a little bit on prices. We would expect that to normalise into the next year, though.
Now, another success with an $18 million profit for the last 12 months to June, up 58% on last year. That's huge, as the increased fair value gains for livestock for New Zealand king salmon. How did they maintain and grow this with that challenging supply chain environment, especially with air freight?
Yeah, look, in terms of the headline numbers for king salmon, it's worth noting there are a large amount of accounting treatments that can impact the year-on-year profit. So really the underlying profit of $11 million was a step down, and New Zealand king salmon sells 75% of its product into food service. And as we mentioned earlier, that channel has really been impacted by stay-at-home orders around the world. So from a this year perspective, result-wise, I guess a little softer than we would like to see, but not unsurprising given the disruption that channel has experienced. Certainly a little bit more inventory on the balance sheet at the moment as they look to sell, I guess, much like many companies, shift their exposure more towards that retail customer.
Now, moving a little bit more into the manufacturing side of things, Sculler results overall in line with prior corresponding periods?
Yeah, look, Skellerup, there are two divisions within Skellerup. One is the industrial and the other is the agribusiness. Now, the agribusiness was really the standout in the period being with a lot of, they sell essential consumable products used in the milking of cows, and they effectively saw some concern from customers about not having stock early on, and so they saw a large, pull through of demand early on, which helped boost that result. The other good or encouraging sign was the US market, which represents a reasonable growth opportunity for them. They continued to gain a bit of market share there in the agribusiness.
And the companies that took a hammering, Rural Supplies Group PGG Wrightson reported a second half-year loss of $15 million to June 30. The elephant in the room, should they really have sold seed?
Yeah, look, ultimately on the sale of their seed and grain business, ultimately it becomes a question of price. And at the time, we certainly viewed that price as attractive. I mean, if we look at it against, again at the time, against the peer multiple group and against recent transactions, that price was at about a 20% premium. And so we were or viewed the transaction positively.
Manuka honey exporter Comvita's net loss narrowed to $9.7 million in the year to June 30. There has been some, in the recent couple of days, some excitement around the new vision and new CEO to turn this company's fortunes around. How are shareholders feeling about that?
Yeah, look, certainly encouraged by the new management team. And if you think about that result in terms of a half on half, they went from a first half loss to a second half profit. So a good turnaround in terms of that, although was a company that's had a net tailwind from COVID. So be a beneficiary, I guess, of the medicinal qualities of honey. It's simplified its strategy going forward. They're aiming to reduce SKUs, their stock keeping units, and really focus on their core growth markets of the US and China. So, look, it's early days for both the new management and the new strategy, but definitely encouraged by the early signs.
And headwinds or no headwinds, how are you generally feeling about the reported success, which a lot of them didn't fully take into account a 12-month of this impact of COVID, and where the next 12 months could likely go? How are you feeling at Forsyth Barr around this particular portfolio?
Look, it's really varied across the sector, and as we've just seen from the results commentary, it kind of depends on what your channel exposure is. So, look, for those companies exposed to food service, of which seafood is one that is generally higher weighting to food service, look, I suspect it's probably going to be or remain reasonably challenging for a wee while as we get, a turnover of food service operators and a return in comfort of the consumer to start eating out again. And also, compounding on that is those freight charges, in particular around fresh air freight capacity is obviously a lot lower, which has meant that the freight rates being offered to these companies is much higher, and that weighs on margin in the short term. But for the most part, these companies are, in a somewhat privileged position as essential businesses and able to continue operating, and have certainly learned a few production lessons during the first lockdown and first iterations of higher alert levels. So going forward, should be able to adapt at a better pace. Although, look, COVID-19 certainly adds a lot of uncertainty to the outlook, not only from a recurring lockdown perspective, but also from how the consumer ultimately reacts, and the economic overhang that has yet to manifest itself.
Yeah, absolutely. There'll be a lot of boardroom chat around the words, how pandemic proof is this and what is our exposure to that? And potentially we're going to have more resilient businesses out of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, which an excellent way of getting an overview from Guy Hooper there, Equity Analyst for Forsyth Barr. And continuing on the honey chat, after the break, we're going to be joined by Karin Kos, CEO for Apiculture New Zealand. This is ahead of news that New Zealand Trade and Enterprise are stumping up to help the marketing efforts for New Zealand honey. And what a way to launch 1st of September, today, start of spring, Be Aware Month. All that after the break on Sarah's Country. This is Sarah's Country.
It's one of nature's most natural products, New Zealand honey. On the world stage, Aotearoa New Zealand is renowned for the unique quality and taste of its honeys. We have an incredibly unique environment, we're passionate about bees and respect their critical role in nature. The purity of New Zealand honey is second to none. It's natural and it's healthy, and there's such an amazing variety of beautiful flavours. It's kind of a taste tour of New Zealand from a jar. New Zealand honey is a lot like our wine. Its origins are all different, and you can taste that difference because the flavour depends on the flora, the bee, climate, soil, and where in New Zealand the honey comes from. So every New Zealand honey tells a different story, and every harvest has its own story too. There's the kāmahi honey, produced from kāmahi trees, a feature of the South Island's rugged west coast. It's an intense flavour sensation. It's creamy and buttery and would go really well with a good camembert. Then there's Manuka honey. It's dark and earthy and a beautiful natural sweetener. I like it drizzled on fresh sourdough with real butter or with muesli and yogurt for a healthy breakfast. And the native Manuka tree offers many benefits to the environment and our people. And let's not forget the humble clover. It's found in the pastures of New Zealand farmland where sheep and cows graze in grassy paddocks. Its delicate flavour and fudge-like texture makes it a standout New Zealand honey. Absolutely beautiful. There are also honey blends that capture a mix of these botanical tastes. From native plants found in rainforests, volcanic plains and coastal areas, From light to dark, smooth and creamy to crunchy, every honey has a unique taste that's distinctive to the regions that the bees inhabit. It's all about kaitiakitanga, that's guardianship, making sure the bees' natural environment is maintained, and in turn, these bees keep our crops and forests growing while producing delicious honey. When the bees are doing well, nature is doing well. For some honey, hives are placed in remote areas where there are unique pure nectar sources. Natural and antibiotic-free, our honey is lovingly harvested, respecting what nature has perfected. And our honey is made under some of the world's strictest quality controls, right here in New Zealand. It's taste you can trace. We use technology so you can trust where the honey comes from, in some cases, right down to the bees that made it. Whether it's on your toast or your muesli, your tuppers, in your cup of tea or straight from the spoon, if you're looking for unique tastes of honey, we know a place.
Well, what a way to kick off spring today. No other than the launch of a new slick marketing story for one of our finest foods, honey. Now, on Monday, the New Zealand Story Project, funded in part through Trade and Enterprise and developed by Apiculture New Zealand, has made a toolkit of marketing resources available to honey producers who want to market their products internationally. The launch of the New Zealand Honey Story has been welcomed as a good start by the industry, but more will be needed to help boost sales of growing honey stocks around the country. Joining us now to discuss is CE for Apiculture New Zealand, Karin Kos. Now, Karin, is this a silver bullet for positioning New Zealand honey globally, or as we said in the intro, there is more to do, and what?
So look, for us, we have done it superbly with, profiling Manuka honey on the international marketplace, which has been a real boost for New Zealand, for our exports, for honey exports. But really, there are a whole range of other wonderful New Zealand honeys that we don't talk about, that we haven't profiled as much. And we think it's really time to put the spotlight on those honeys. So honeys like Rewarewa, like Pahutakawa, like Rata, these are wonderful honeys. They come from New Zealand, they're unique to New Zealand. And I guess it's really about showcasing the whole range and giving, as you said, giving our industry really simple but great quality tools to be able to do that.
For those who have been watching and listening from the start, you would have heard the video played earlier. And for those listening or watching just this interview, please search on YouTube. It is a great video, New Zealand Honey Story, into YouTube. As you just said there, taste differentials is something similar in our wine industry. Things like te wā, and I know in Central Otago, I was raised on Viper Blue Goss from the high country. How do you encourage more regional collectives and individual companies to tell that story?
So that's a big issue and challenge for us. It's about getting a more collective approach to perhaps how we market our honey. We're a small country on the global stage. We punch above our weight, but I would like to see our industry take a more collective approach, particularly, like you say, on a regional basis. We have different honeys in different regions, and I think there's a real opportunity, and we are starting to see some of those companies do that, and some regions do that, to take a more regional approach to how they could promote their honeys. And I think that's going to be more impactful for them as well.
What can we take from our learnings around intellectual property with Manuka and how we can pair with iwi to have those very unique names? Because I know that's where our cheese and our wine industries are now at threat with geographical indicators. And how can we protect it moving forward?
So we've been very fortunate as an industry that we have worked very closely with iwi and with government to get some considerable funding to start looking at how we protect the term Manuka from New Zealand, Manuka honey. And so I think there's a fair amount of work, and a lot of work's already gone into looking at how we could do that. And again, it's that collective approach, Sarah. It's working with industry, it's working with iwi, it's getting the support of our government to really push that intellectual property and ownership rights around the word Mānuka honey, and I'm really pleased that we've actually seen that make a good. There's a good start to that whole process.
Okay, so in other sectors of our food and beverage in this country, red meat and wool, we've seen a marketing levy approach. Now, the beekeeping industry have not particularly supported an industry commodity levy. How do you believe that you can raise that considerable marketing spend needed to collectively approach and fund New Zealand honey?
So as you point out, we did go for a levy a few years ago. We weren't successful. I think the environment's changed since then. I think we're now in an environment where we actually do have significant stockpiles of honey. People are looking at how we move those honey stockpiles, but also how beekeepers can have a sustainable living. And so the whole purpose and idea around a commodity levy is that the industry develops funds and grows funds, like the wine industry's done, like other primary sector industries have done, to build a collective amount of funding that can really take a national view and really support our beekeepers and our industry. It's something I'm very keen to see progress, but it's going to take time. You know, we've got to make sure that all beekeepers are on side with how that could work, how we could fund that. So I think there's still a way away, but I think I can certainly see some movement there and some interest in the industry taking a more collective approach.
For those who are not aware around commodity prices for the different types of honey, what is that gap between Mānuka and the other varietals?
Look, it does depend on the other varietals, but we've seen, I guess, a drop of around sort of 50 to 70% for those non-Mānuka honeys. So I think that's probably the drop that we've seen over the last couple of years. So we're looking at how we can, I guess, just raise the profile, but also try and get that premium for those other honeys so that they are a little bit more equitable and essentially that our beekeepers do have a sustainable long-term secure future, because, you know, as an agricultural nation, we need bees. We need bees for pollination services. They're critical to this country. So we've got to make sure that beekeepers have a viable future.
And let's talk about the 1st of September, a very important day in launching Bee Aware Month. Can you tell us more about that?
So Apiculture New Zealand has established this Bee Aware Month for a few years now, and it grows and grows in popularity. Kiwis love their bees. They really want to support their bees, and they really want to understand how they can do that. So this is all about a month of focus on bees, what you can do to protect them, how you can, for example, spray safely, not spray at all, but avoid the flowers, avoid spraying at the time when plants are flowering. So it's really an awareness campaign, an education campaign. But what I love about it is we get a lot of school kids involved, we get communities involved, we get councils involved, and it's really clear that New Zealanders love their bees. What can we do to protect them? What can we do to, I guess, educate and raise awareness about the critical role they play, as we said, in pollination, but also as a great food source, just in terms of the environment. So this is the spotlight on bees and honey this month, Sarah.
Excuse the pun, but what are you doing in regards to cross-pollination across the sector with our livestock industry, our arable sector, to be able to raise awareness for them to be aware of their impacts on bees?
Look, what I've loved about working in the primary sector is that we are so much more, connected as a primary sector. So, for example, I'm part of the CE's primary sector farming group, and we meet regularly. So these sorts of things get discussed around the table. So it is actually these guys and these organisations are really aware of the importance of bees. I certainly talk about it to them, but they are very aware of it and really supportive. So I think there's a growing understanding and awareness that we all need to understand our roles and understand how bees can support those sectors as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karin. And of course, best wishes with, as you said, a growing Bee Aware Month, which is the month of September. For our listeners and viewers, is there anything that they can do to reach out and support our bee nation this month?
So look, if you're gardening, plant lots of flowers, plant lots of colours. We've also talked about, you don't need to mow your lawn as much. Let a few things like clover and dandelions come through. Bees love that. So it's just about providing the environment for bees so they have access to good nectar sources.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for the advice. Karin Kos is the CE for Apiculture New Zealand. And of course, as we were discussing in the introduction, have a look at the New Zealand honey story, which you can find on YouTube. For those interested in how they can access that toolkit, if you are a honey producer in the industry, head to New Zealand Story. I utilise this a lot for our business, and you register, and all of that's there for free. Beautiful photography, beautiful videos, and you can utilise that in your marketing to position your story and the New Zealand honey story globally to be the best in the world that we know it is. Now, coming up after the break to close the show, how do we make strong wool the best in the world? We're going to ask that and many more questions to the new chair of the Strong Wool Action Group, Rob Hewitt, a man of many chairs, and this next one I know he's extremely passionate about. All that after the break on Sarah's Country. This is Sarah's Country.
Really pleased we got into this. Thanks for your help, Dave.
It's a good idea, honey.
You reckon it'll come out?
Cover it in talcum powder, leave it 10 minutes, you'll be fine.
Good call, Dave.
Good call on getting those security cameras, Dave.
You call a new one yet?
Yeah, kind of.
When you've got decisions to make, we'll be there to help you make the right call.
I'd go for those ones, Bob. Yeah, good call.
Did you choose these?
Oh,
For great advice and insurance, talk to FMG.
Well, on Monday, a collaboration of representatives announced from across the primary sector that they've come together to carry out the recommendations of Minister O'Connor's Wool Industry Project Action Group report to be now the task force to fix Strong Wool's woes. I introduced to you Strong Wool Action Group, and its chair, a gentleman who is comfortable being in the top chair of some hard conversations, Mr. Rob Hewitt. How was that for an introduction, Rob?
Sarah, that was very kind. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us and, of course, taking on this role. First out of the blocks, did Minister O'Connor handpick this group, or was it independently pulled together?
He came up with the PAG group, which was the initial working group, and then out of that this came. So it was a combination of both, really. But make no mistake, this group has been handpicked, and we want a good mixture across the industry of farmers, of processors, and not only wool processors but meat processors as well. And most importantly, consumer experts who spend time understanding what consumers want from the product ranges they're selling. So this has to be a consumer-focused exercise.
I'm going to work through this particular group because for some in this industry, who's on this group is important. But firstly, we talk about how the industry is getting better at collective collaboration. How come the likes of the talk of Emerge Primary Wool Co-op and Wools of New Zealand, 2,000 suppliers, or a very large collective of interests such as the National Council of Wool Interests that Craig Smith pulled together over this time are not a part of this group?
Well, Thomas Sullivan's in there, and he's involved with the Council of Wool Interests, I believe. But fundamentally, look, we could have probably 3 times as many members as we've got, and you've just got to draw the line somewhere. I'll just make a couple of observations. I mean, the reason the meat industry is involved, and the reason I'm involved, is that we can't afford not to be. You know, if we want a strong sheep meat sector, excuse me, if we want a strong sheep meat sector that props up as a key part of our meat industry, then we need wool to pull its part. I guess the thing that the meat sector has done is that we have put our money where our mouth is, and we've stumped up with some seed cash to get this thing rolling, which will be matched by MPI, and that's giving us a seat at the table. But more important, look, this thing's been rattling around for 20 years, quite frankly, and that's not to say that the existing industry hasn't tried hard. They certainly have, and I certainly applaud people like Craig Carfield's primary and Wools of New Zealand for the merger proposal that they're talking about. That stuff should happen anyway. But, you know, I think it's fair to say that a bigger version of what we've got will not solve the problems of the strong wool sector. We need to come at this from a different angle. And that's why, in part, that we've certainly got representatives from the existing wool sector. We can't have them all, otherwise the group would be too big. And we're certainly committed to contacting and working with people in the sector if they want to be, and we'll be reaching out to them in due course.
Okay, totally understand. Coming at it from different angles. And of course, this group represents, as you said, 4 red meat processing and marketing companies, and of course, marketing and innovation expertise. Naming this, yourself, Rob, Kate Ackland, Mount Summer Station, Paul Austin from Cavalier Bremworth, Tony Balfour was formerly of Icebreaker, David Ferrier from Wool Scouring New Zealand, Craig Hickson, of course, well known in the red meat industry, as is Andrew Morrison, Chair of Beef and Lamb, and Tom O'Sullivan, as you mentioned, Campaign for Wool. Of course, some from outside of the red meat and wool sector, such as John Rodwell involved with dairy, and Nardine Tunley, honey and pip fruit. And then exporters such as Peter Whitman and Steve Williamson from New Zealand Merino. Fantastic, bright minds within our industry. Will we see outside of industry thinking come to the table this time round?
Absolutely. That's look, really, I think this group's really only got one real aim. I mean, there's 2 or 3, but fundamentally the big job in town is to bring what is called outside-in thinking into the wool sector. And this is unashamedly, I'm nicking this idea from Te Hono, which is a Stanford boot camp for New Zealand agricultural exporters. That's been running for about 10 years, and New Zealand Merino have been integral to this over that time. And really what it is bringing a consumer lens to looking at this problem in the wool sector specifically here. You know, we're not about inventing a solution looking for a problem. We want to actually create a solution that the market is looking for. And I take my hat off to the fine wool sector. You know, they've created between Icebreaker and Smart Wool and the others, and now Allbirds, you know, in recent years, I've created new categories for fine wool that didn't exist, and strong wool needs to take a leaf out of that book. I'm not saying that we're going to have an Allbird, but there are going to be applications for strong wool with a consumer focus that we can explore. So there will definitely be outside-in thinking, which is what you're asking for. We don't have all the answers in this group, but we know how to ask a few questions, and that's really where we're starting with this, the genesis. Get the ideas in the room, start weeding them, and then bring them back to see which ones have got legs. And
I want to go back to that 2,000 supplier group of that potential merger, because effectively that's what you need to harness to create, pair up with commercial opportunities. Are you looking to create a corporate organisation from this group, and why not just expand on the strong wool job that New Zealand Merino is doing?
Well, I mean, New Zealand Merino are doing a great job as far as I'm concerned. There's certainly a lot of learning that we can take out of there, and we intend to. That's why Steve Williamson's on the working group. In part, I mean, we've also, we leverage their Te Hono contacts as well. So there's a couple of reasons for that. Look, I'm a fan of what, as I said earlier, of what Carfield's Primary Wool and Wools of New Zealand are trying to do, and good on them for doing that. And it's going to strip costs out of the wool industry. There's no overhead duplication, but fundamentally the strong wool industry needs a step change. And yes, Merino New Zealand with their strong wool contracts are doing a bit of that, but this is bigger than them. And there's a whole lot of good stuff going on in pockets around the industry that people don't really know about. And, we need to be careful that we're not inventing a better mousetrap here. But, there is some innovative stuff going on. We need to do an environment scan to see what is happening out there, what's scalable, what has real consumer-focused legs. And more importantly, look into the marketplaces and see where applications are that we're not doing at the moment, and bring those together. Now, that's what this group is going to be doing. And from that portfolio, if you like, there will be winners, and they're the ones that will be developed up further for a business case. Now, the Minister's indicated that he's got some funds to invest for the right sort of projects. We expect to get a short list of projects together and see where the opportunities come. And that will be when the source of the product, the combined entity of Wools of New Zealand and Primary Wool, for instance, of the 2,000 suppliers, that's when that discussion becomes quite interesting. But that's a little bit further down the track.
Rob, I know your concerns as a farmer will be very much at the table with this as well. What I'm concerned about is there's some fantastic innovations that are not about bulk wool. So you're extracting keratin and putting it into pharmaceuticals, the small amount used for a wool mask, for example. Some of these incredible innovations are not reflective of a per kilo industry structure to return value to the farmer. Are we going to ensure that our farmers are heavily invested in the value add of strong wool and somebody else isn't just capitalising on such a low product cost?
Yeah, well, I guess it's going to, I think it's fair to say that whatever the opportunities that are uncovered are going to require investment, and then the question will be, where does that investment come from? Now, I own co-ops in my farming business personally. I have shareholdings in a number of cooperatives, and I am personally of the view that if you want a seat at the table, if you want to have a say as a farmer, you need to own a portion of your supply chain that allows a degree of influence to be exerted. So, farmers will make up their own minds whether they wish to invest or can invest when opportunities come up, and, there'll be a time to have that discussion. But, I'll just make the point that those that invest get the returns.
So what do you say to the farmer who just paid $30,000 to harvest the wool off at no return this season?
Well, I'll say join the club, and it's disgraceful, quite frankly. I mean, my own situation, my lamb's wool was around about 36% of my harvesting cost. It's abominable. Quite frankly, this is a bloody good product that is not being, just to say it's certainly not being recognised in the marketplace. And I think, in part, that is for a number of reasons. It's pretty simplistic to say that the consumer doesn't get it. Well, we haven't marketed it well. Strong wool's been treated as a carpet fibre. You only need to look through a few websites about North American house designs to see how many carpet fibres are on the floor in a parquet floored house. And of the carpets that are on the floor, they're probably nylon. So the solution is not carpet wool. Carpet wool will be part of the solution. It is not going to be the total solution. We need to be bigger than that and think a bit more expensively. It could be disposable nappies. There's great technology there. It could be the face masks. It's not going to just be carpet wool, and we need to grasp those opportunities, and through leveraging that, the opportunities will come.
As we have been following quite strongly through both Ceres Country and Farmers Weekly with the work that Annette Scott has been doing, what should we expect next and by when?
Out of this working group?
Yes.
Well, we've got to get our act together. I mean, it was only announced yesterday, so we'll be meeting next week, and then our environmental scan and our outside and thinking process will start. So I would expect this. Look, I don't like mucking around, but having said that, I'm not quite sure how fast we can move at the moment. We're still working it through, but I'd expect that we'll have a bunch of ideas to bring back to the Minister for further fleshing out by early next year, and then business case will need to be prepared, and potential investors alongside maybe MPI lined up. So there's a bit of work, bit of water to go under the bridge, and exciting times. But quite frankly, the strong wool industry needs it. And as I said at the outset, if wool doesn't pull its weight, we'll have more trees planted on pastoral land. And on the fanner trees, I grow a lot myself, but they're in the right place, and it's not in the paddock. It's on the sideling and providing shelter and carbon in the right place. And together they work, but too many of them probably not good for New Zealand agriculture.
Rob, lastly, before you go, on a personal note, you are a fantastic leader within our industry, co-chairing Silver Fern Farms, chairing Farmlands Cooperative, and now this. Do you have time for it all? As well as farming?
It's a good question. I get asked that reasonably frequently, actually. I'm learning to delegate quite well, Sarah. But this is a coalition of the willing, and part of the reason for picking these people that are on the group, not only do they represent their various sectors pretty well, but they're not afraid to get in and roll their sleeves up. So we'll be leveraging that. I mean, yes, I am chairing Silver Fern, or co-chairing Silver Fern Farms, but they'll be winding out towards the middle of next year. So yeah, there's time available, and this is too important. You've got to make time available. I'm just fortunate myself that I've got a very good farm manager who looks after the day-to-day back at home very, very well, and actually likes to see me go out and do these sorts of things because it means he gets a free run.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. New chair of a new group, the Strong Wool Action Group. That's Rob Hewitt. And, of course, that's just come out earlier this week. We will see where that leads to. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight on Ceres Country, wherever you are around the country and around the world, listening to us on demand on podcast. You can subscribe to Ceres Country on podcast wherever you are around the world. This is the beauty of bringing the best of food and fibre produced here in the bottom of the world in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we discuss the matters that matter most. I did say I was going to close on this. Joel said, don't. But hey, look, it's fantastic. Stephen Wynne-Harris, long-time opinion maker in Farmers Weekly, has become Farmers Weekly's agony aunt. He is now getting letters in from rural males with a major concern. And it reads, Stephen, I'm writing to you on affairs of the heart and hope you can help me. I've chosen you because you're an older male and frankly, there is no one else. I have recently become married and there are a number of issues concerning my new wife that have left me perplexed. She's a high-flying lawyer working in the city, and as a simple shepherd, I sometimes feel out of depth. I haven't had much experience with the ladies, and I find this change in cultures difficult to learn. Signing off bewildered in Balclutha. And Stephen's advice is interesting. Over his years of being married to 35 years to a wonderful woman, he said, don't bother with self-help books. The quote, Groucho Marx, a woman is a woman, but a cigar is a smoke. He thinks it's very profound, even though he doesn't know what it means. And he said to experience, to slowly learn her language and work her out. She really wants you to say the right thing and not the first thing that pops into your head. Then it gets interesting. The second issue you raise is more complex. I think most Kiwi males now feel the sort of inferiority complex you describe. Cripes, we live in a country where the Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Sovereign, Governor-General, Attorney-General, and goodness knows what else are or already are women. Our women's rugby, netball, cricket teams are the best in the world, whereas the men's teams not only lose, but they also lost so much confidence that they can't even do basic things such as throw a ball in a line out correctly. I think we men are feeling disenfranchised and overawed by all these strong women that are now in charge. However, fear not, because Stephen believes there is a wonderful opportunity for men. He believes it's a time to sit back and let the country and big business be run by women, and they can take all the responsibilities and stress in the world, because it's time that men have a lot more lunches and coffee dates together and get down and talk about their feelings. Signing off Ceres Country tonight with that fantastic piece from Stephen Wynne-Harris in your Farmers Weekly. Of course, Ceres Country is brought to you in alliance with the great people at Farmers Weekly. It's a lot of fun, and we're going to do it all again tomorrow evening from 7 o'clock live and, of course, on demand. Feel free to send me an email, sarah@periamedia.com. And in the meantime, good night and go well. This is Ceres Country.